Hey everybody, what's up? I realized that there was a hole in knowledge base or discussion or something. I don't really know what to group this into, but most gun people throw around terms like medium or light or heavy when they talk about lubrication, or running a gun wet or dry, or I don't know, something in the middle, kind of wet. I don't know. But anyways, my goal here is I have 3 of the same gun, essentially. One of them's obviously a tactical, so the barrel is threaded and the frame is a different color. But I have 3 of the same gun to compare 3 different lubrication levels as far as I see them. Now, this is by no means a scientific process, and everyone is going to have a different opinion of what wet is, what dry is, and what, I don't know, the middle of the road is. I was going to make a sexual reference, but let's not be crude. My specific goal here is just to give you some sort of baseline to compare it to. You can obviously modify it as needed, and you don't have to do what I do. It's not, well, I do it the way Navy man does it, so blah. You know, it's do it how you want to do it. It's your gun, it's your life, you got to live with it. What I will start off by saying is running a gun dry is not ideal, and I don't know of many circumstances where it's smart. The only reason I have an example is to contrast the other 2, as well as demonstrate what happens when you carry a gun for too long without cleaning it, or you shoot it a lot, or you leave your car gun in the car during the summer and never clean it. It's going to get dry. Now, I will say the example I have here for the dry weapon is not dry. It's not bone dried and alcohol swab it. I didn't do anything like that. But I wiped off all the lubricant I could to leave a very light, very light, thin coat. I'm also going to show you what the guns look like before I field strip them, only because the exterior look will change after I touch them. Now, first, this is my example of a very lightly lubricated and or what some people will call dry. It is not bone dry, but that's, you know, the wide range of what this could be. This is what I call medium lubrication. This is how my guns are right after cleaning and how I'll put them away and or take them to the range. This one might be a little on the more wet side or slightly more lubricated, more like a medium well, if you will. But it's, to me, this is medium lubrication. This is how your gun should be. And over here we have the example of a very wet, over lubricated weapon. There's going to be a lot of fuzzies on this for 2 reasons. 1, it's over lubricated, so it's going to attract anything in the air. And 2, I have aminals. Just to cover this now, this is not ideal. This is my recommendation and preference for how a weapon should be. And this, for me, the only time this should look like this is if I'm storing it for a period greater or potentially greater than 6 months. If I don't know I'm going to take this gun out for a while, I know I'm going to be focusing on other ones, I'll heavy lubricate it just to put it away that way. This is best for very damp environments, and I will store a weapon very wet and put desiccant packs in there to keep other moisture out. The oil will form kind of a membrane, and the desiccant pack will keep a lot of the moisture out. That's just my mileage with this kind of thing, because I'm used to going away for long periods of time. I think the longest I was away was about 1.5 years. I had someone that was able to check my guns periodically, but they would open the box and be like, okay, it's good, you know, and shut it. I've never had any weapons or anything that I've stored in the weapons case rust on me. I have had gun parts, on the other hand, rust on me because I purchased a lot of extra replacement parts and I didn't lubricate them, and they don't come lubricated from the factory. So it's really important to lubricate those parts. Alright, getting back on track here. So, just to show you what dry is. This is an example of a dry handgun. When you rack it, you don't get any lubrication at all. There's there's nothing. Okay, the action isn't necessarily dry, like it's not fighting me, it's not gritty or anything, but you'll notice that there's no like little, well, there is a little bit. See, this is not completely dry, but it's very, very lightly lubricated. Because I use M Pro 7, it does, over time and with increased frequency of use, make its way into the metal, which is a good thing. You'll see that the outside of the slide has a little bit of oil here and there, you know, some deposits, but honestly it's almost gray looking. This is not typical for this gun. I've just dried it as much as I could without using alcohol. And you'll see that the barrel does still appear lubricated, although it's a very, very light amount of lubrication. Like, there's nothing transferring to my finger. It's hard to see because the light washes real bad, but there's no transfer to my finger. Maybe just a little, the equivalent of maybe some grease from your nose after a hot day, tops, but even then it's not even really giving you that much. But you will see that the metal is still protected from the extended use of whatever lubricant you're using. So that this is lightly lubricated. We'll get into the internals here soon, but I just wanted to give you a rundown of the exterior. This is medium lubrication. Again, sorry for the fuzzies. Medium lubrication entails a very thin coat of oil on the slide for me. Not a requirement, but something I like to do. It makes it look a lot better for a lot longer. There's not really any transfer to your fingers, and when you touch it, you'll get a little fingerprint, but it's not anything too crazy. You don't feel like you immediately have to wash your hands after touching it, and it's just a nice thin coat across the whole slide. As far as the action, it's the same as the slide, although there's a little bit. It's going to be hard to see, but it did transfer onto my finger. And when I rack it, there should be a little extra oil transfer. Okay? You kind of see it now. Some of my weapons, there'll be a little more oil that comes off from there. But again, I tried to get these all in the same par, so I may have taken just a little too much off. Alright, now as far as the barrel goes, it looks similar because of the lighting setup I have in my camera, but a considerable amount of oil comes off when you rub it like this. Not a considerable really, but you can definitely detect that there's oil on your finger. It's not wet, it's not drenched, but you can definitely tell that there's oil on it. And it's enough that it's a constant even coat throughout the entire barrel. All in all though, this is a medium and or proper lubrication. This is how I clean my guns after shooting, and this is how I will take them back to the range and or put them back in the holster. Now moving on to the very wet or heavily lubricated pistol. I just touched it, so there's a fingerprint already, but this is clearly very wet. Me just rubbing my finger here takes off oil, and it's very, very similar lubrication to how it comes from the factory. Again, this is not knowing how long you're going to have this stored, and I will also, if a gun is like this, if I clean a gun for storage, I will wipe it down before I shoot it. I do not shoot a gun this wet. You'll notice that when you rack the slide, it'll deposit oil every pass. Just because of how wet it is, okay? And it's a considerable amount of oil. Okay, it'll do that every time. You can hear the difference in the spring too, the recoil spring. I've also heavily lubricated the guide rod, which you can kind of see in there. Now this barrel is very wet. Doing that, it's that one pass with my finger has left more oil on it than a medium or proper lubricated gun. So it's just something to look at. Also the bore will be oiled, and all the internals will be oiled. Obviously not the breech face. We don't want anything getting down in there into the firing pin channel, but you get the idea. A lot of fuzzies. Also, you're going to get a lot of oil transfer onto the back of the handgun from the rails. The slide rails and the guide rails from the frame are heavily oiled, so you will see that, and that's one of the problems when you have an over lubricated gun. The gun will still function, as Larry Vickers has proven, but you're going to get a lot of spatter from the pistol as you shoot it, both from all this lubrication and from the back here. It may just ooze out onto your hand, but you really don't want lubrication on your hand during a gunfight. Not a smart thing. Or even at the range. You know, you don't want to drop your gun while you're shooting it. But I think I've beaten up the wet pistol enough. It's pretty obvious, you can see it. Okay, so here's just a quick aerial shot. I can't really move too much because of my camera setup, but this is obviously very dry. In the middle, again, is properly lubricated, and off to the left here is very wet. So you can kind of see from the top the difference. This slide is noticeably almost gray. This one's about a normal color, and that's really shiny because it's wet. Okay, now moving on to the internals. Taking a look at the inside of the slides, initially you're not going to notice a huge difference. You can kind of see this one's still a little more wet. That one's probably about properly lubricated, and in here it's about the same. Now you're going to notice the recoil assembly is really dry on this one. There's a little bit from the slide release. That's because they're always wet for me. Anyone you see's got oil on it. You'll notice that there's not a whole lot of lubrication. It's pretty dry. The recoil spring assemblies in general don't really need to be run wet, or they're more of a light lubricated item. Okay, so the barrel, it's going to be pretty dry. It's still got a little residual lubrication on it. The bore's dry, and it's still got some oil on it, and it will function this way, but it's very lightly lubricated. The inside of the slide here, where I usually put a drop of oil, has, again, a little residual lubrication, but still pretty dry. And, you know, it's pretty dry throughout. I mean, the slide rails still have a little bit of oil in there. But overall, very lightly lubricated, and for all intents and purposes, very dry. Moving on to the medium lubrication, or proper lubrication. A little bit more oil on the rear key of the recoil spring assembly. The guide rod's a little more lubricated, and it's pretty clear to see. The barrel is going to be consistently lubricated. Again, it's going to be hard to tell the difference, but it's definitely got more oil on it than the dry example, and this is how it should be lubricated. There's enough oil on it that it will remain lubricated through, you know, a couple of range days or concealed carry or whatever you're going to task it with that particular day, or week or month or whatever, and still retain some lubrication. It'll also be okay to store for a while this way, and, you know, it's pretty much how it should be lubricated. You're not getting gobs of oil all over you while you touch it, and it's good enough to pretty much go into any environment and work. On to the wet one. This is obviously over lubricated. You'll see that the guide rod has a lot of oil on it. It's going to be hard to catch because you got to kind of look at the guide rod through the spring, which I'm sure the camera is not articulating. The key has a lot of oil on it. It's coming off on my hands real bad. You can kind of see how wet it is there. The barrel is going to be very wet. This portion here is also going to be pretty wet. I try not to get too much oil back here, but some guys will slather oil everywhere they can get it. It's not going to mess the gun up back here, but it doesn't really need it there either. So it's just some food for thought. Now this barrel is wet. This is a very wet barrel. There's excess oil on it. It's definitely, you can shoot it this way. It will fire and it's not going to jam up. There are times when having it this wet is advantageous, and there are plenty of times when it's not. Also, the inside of the slide, very wet. I may not have covered the other slide while I'm thinking about it. You can see this is properly lubricated. There's oil in there, but it's not a lot. It's a very nice, medium, even coat. And comparing it to the wet, you can see the difference. Alrighty? Same goes for the inside of the channel cut for the barrel there. So this is a very, 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 very wet firearm. Super easy to put back together, however, not necessarily ideal. So that portion concludes the slides. As far as the frames go, this one's pretty dry. There's a little bit of lube I missed. But the rails are dry, the controls are dry, and in the back sear area with all the hammer components and such is pretty dry. I don't really like it super wet in here in general, but dry is also not ideal. Going to the properly lubricated firearm, you can see a little bit of oil back there. That's about as much as I like. A little bit for the sear and those associated parts. I also put 1 drop on the trigger return spring, and you'll see a little bit of oil throughout the system. You don't want a lot in your dust cover because it'll just take all the dirt and accumulate it there. So you don't want a lot of carbon, fouling, dirt, anything, sand. You don't really want a lot there. If it's got to go somewhere, this is better, but not ideal. Then you have the over lubricated, which in retrospect the tan one was not the best to show this, but you can see quite a bit in there and quite a bit in the rear mostly. Okay, there's also a bunch on the trigger return spring. It's very heavily lubricated in here, and that's again to protect it for being away for a long period of time. You can shoot it this way. It's going to get 5 times as dirty this way. There's going to be the spatter bonding to carbon and other fouling, and it's going to get scattered throughout the system this way. If you're shooting a high round count that day, it's also going to do that job pretty well. Also, as a side note, for a heavily lubricated pistol, I will store the magazines lubricated as well, especially in the magazine well. It's not necessary for HKs, but I will say some companies, the first Navy edition of the SIG P226, for example, the magazines would rust and the magazine well would rust. It was surface rust, and it was the coating of the magazines, not the Mark 25, the first Navy edition. So you had to keep that lubricated. Now with a polymer frame, not necessarily the case, but it's a good practice to be in, especially if you're storing the weapon. So all in all, proper lubrication is important. As Larry Vickers demonstrated, you can have a gun that is over lubricated run just fine. You are going to get a lot of lubrication transfer into your body, into your face, all those places, and it's going to be harder to run. It's harder to grip. It's just overall not a great day if your gun is over lubricated. I won't be shooting this for a while, so I can leave it as is. I might wipe it down after the end of this video. This HK45 LEM here, this is ideal. It was its day to get its freshening up, cleaning. And I think it's very important to clean your firearms periodically. It's very, very important, especially your carry weapons, to, you know, based on the conditions and the environment and the finish of your weapon, it's very important to clean them periodically, because you don't want to run a dry gun, or you don't want to run into a situation where you draw a dry gun. It'll probably work, but you don't want it in a situation where you have to have a gun that's properly cleaned and properly lubricated. The medium lubrication is, in my experience, it's almost always the best. You get the best of both worlds. It's lubricated enough where it won't stop from not being lubricated, and it gets fouled up really quickly. And it's not over lubricated, so it's not throwing lube into your eyes while you're shooting, or getting it all over your hands, or, you know, picking up all sorts of crud because of how wet it is. So the medium lubrication to me is when a gun is always ready, and it's the easiest thing to do. So most guys are going to recommend this level of lubrication, save the slide. I'm a very big proponent of oiling the outside of the weapon with a thin coat. But medium lubrication throughout the system is always intelligent. There is a small group of people that will run a barrel wet, but in a medium lubricated gun. It's kind of a unique balance. The rest of the gun will have proper lubrication, a medium coat, but the barrel will be super wet for whatever reason. Again, it's all personal preference, and you don't have to follow exactly what I do just to make me happy or whatever. I'm going to leave that one apart because I got to lubricate it. I just realized I have a gun here that kind of fits the medium lubrication with almost wet for the barrel. It's kind of hard to show because it's loaded, but the barrel is pretty medium well on the lubrication. Every time you cycle it, you get a little more lubrication popping up. I'd say this barrel is almost wet. Not quite, but almost. This is still shootable to me. You're not getting any ooze out of the back or anything. It's more lubrication in this area. If you go high round count or a nasty environment or something to that degree, you're going to have more to clean up here. But some cases, more lubrication is better. Sometimes it's not. I think the rest of this weapon is definitely medium lubrication, but the barrel and the top of the slide here have probably 1 drop extra each of oil, if that makes sense. So just wanted to show you something to contrast. But my goal here, just to establish a baseline for everybody. It's not gospel, it's just the best I could do in a pinch. And I wanted to, give everyone some sort of frame of reference as to what a dry or lightly lubricated weapon is, a properly lubricated or medium lubrication weapon, and then heavily lubricated and or wet firearm. So it's just up to you, whatever you feel you need to do. If you're a new shooter, I strongly recommend going medium and then adding or subtracting where you need to. Going over lubricated is really hard to troubleshoot. Going dry is also really hard to troubleshoot. And there's videos throughout the internet of someone either not cleaning a gun and it stops, and then adding some lubricant and it works just fine. And also, well, let's do this dry gun for this test, and then it stops up. It's something you have to figure out for yourself. It's not rocket science, but it's also, each gun has different lubrication levels that it appreciates. And when you identify a spot that gets dry real fast or gets fouled real easy or whatever, you tailor your lubrication to those needs. It's just something to think about, and you don't want to waste oil if you don't have to, like I did for this video. If you have any questions, please leave them below. And again, this isn't gospel, so I know some people are going to try to pick apart what I've done here, but I just try to throw something together relatively quickly but still thorough to address the issue. Thanks for watching. Take care of each other, stay safe, and support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America.